By 2090, the world had become a masterclass in adapting to disaster. Floods, wildfires, pandemics, and political collapse had woven themselves into the fabric of daily life. Yet, amidst this chaos, humanity found its most absurd innovation. The end of the World Cooperation, based in a sleek, glass-walled skyscraper in Delaware. This company had turned the apocalypse into a booming business. Their tagline? Survival, tailored to your needs. But there was a catch. There always was. This wasn't about saving humanity. It was about marketing salvation. Their survival packages ranged from the ultra-luxurious Elysium plan to the bare-bones basic extinction avoidance kit. The promise? To sell hope in an era that had forgotten the meaning of the word. The concept was simple, almost elegant. Pay for your life or gamble it away. But could survival really be bought? And if it could, who got left behind? These questions lingered, quietly gnawing at the conscience of a world too distracted to care. At first, people laughed at the absurdity. A company selling escape pods for millionaires, ration kits for the middle class, and tin shelters for the poor felt like a satire ripped from the pages of a dystopian novel. Yet, as the threats grew more tangible and the doomsday clock ticked closer to midnight, the laughter turned to desperate clicks on the corporation's website. But who truly ran this empire of fear? And what dark secrets lay behind their glossy promotional videos and feel-good guarantees? As the profits rolled in, the world began to fracture, not along lines of geography or politics, but by the cold calculus of who could afford to live and who could not. As the End of the World Corporation expanded its operations, it didn't just sell survival, it sold a hierarchy. The packages were meticulously tiered, designed not just for functionality, but for status. They reflected, with brutal honesty, the layers of society that already existed. The Elysium plant, priced at an astronomical sum, was the crown jewel. This package promised fully autonomous bunkers with gourmet hydroponic gardens, AI-driven entertainment, and medical facilities that rivaled any modern hospital. Customers were offered luxury beyond imagination, designed not just to survive the apocalypse, but to thrive in it. The promotional materials featured holographic testimonials of billionaire families smiling, their every need catered to, as the world crumbled outside. Below that was the Sustain Plus, aimed at the well-off but not excessively wealthy. These shelters were functional, with enough supplies for a decade and limited amenities. The corporation promised a comfortable continuity of life, but the glossy facade couldn't quite hide the cracks. Rationed resources, shared facilities, and constant reminders of what they couldn't afford. Then came the Basic Extinction Avoidance Kit. A grim nickname quickly emerged for this package, the Coffin Club. For a fraction of the cost of the premium options, the package offered little more than a steel pod and a handful of MREs. There were no guarantees, just the hope that you might outlast the first wave of catastrophe. It was survival stripped down to its raw, unvarnished essentials. Critics called the system grotesque, an indictment of a world already fractured by inequality. And yet, it thrived. People scrambled to buy what they could afford, not for the quality of life it promised, but for the illusion of control it offered. Each tier became a reflection of its buyer, a bitter truth carved into titanium walls. The corporation's marketing campaigns were relentless, dripping with a perverse optimism. "Live to see the sunrise," one slogan declared, accompanied by an image of a family holding hands in a gleaming bunker. For those with deep pockets, the apocalypse had never looked so picturesque. For everyone else, it was just another reminder that even at the end of the world, money talked. But how had it come to this? How did humanity not just tolerate, but embrace such blatant commodification of survival? And what happened to those who fell through the cracks, unable to afford even the cheapest package? These questions lingered like smoke in the aftermath of a fire, unsettling, inescapable, and impossible to ignore. The end of the World Corporation's meteoric rise wasn't just the result of clever marketing or desperation. Behind the polished exterior, there was a darkness that no amount of PR could hide, a shadowed layer of deceit and manipulation woven into its very foundation. The corporation's survival packages weren't just about profit. They were about control. Each package came with its own terms and conditions, written in legalese so dense it might as well have been another language. Buried within these agreements were clauses that turned customers into de facto assets of the company. Signing up for survival often meant signing away privacy, autonomy, and, in some cases, even legal rights. But the deception ran deeper. Investigative journalists who dared to scratch the surface of the corporation's operations began to uncover disturbing patterns. Supplies in the basic extinction avoidance kit were often expired, faulty, or missing entirely. Reports emerged of customers who had invested their life savings only to be abandoned when the corporation deemed their locations non-strategic for resource delivery. And then there were the whispers. Stories of a secret project known only as the Vault. The Vault, it was rumored, was a massive underground complex, reserved not for customers, but for the corporation's executives, scientists, and a select group of elites. Unlike the marketed packages, the Vault wasn't about surviving the apocalypse. It was about rebuilding from it. If the world ended, the Vault's inhabitants wouldn't just survive, they would inherit the Earth. The corporation's leadership dismissed these claims as conspiracy theories, but their silence was deafening. It didn't help that those who asked too many questions often found themselves on the receiving end of targeted disinformation campaigns, legal threats, or worse. Still, the truth had a way of seeping through the cracks. Former employees, disillusioned and guilt-ridden, began leaking internal documents. Among the revelations was evidence that the corporation had lobbied governments to underfund public disaster preparedness programs. The goal? To make their products not just desirable, but necessary. Yet, even as these scandals came to light, the corporation's grip on the world tightened. For every expose, there were 10 more advertisements, promising hope to the hopeless. People didn't want to believe the worst. They wanted to believe they could buy their way to safety. The corporation thrived not despite the chaos, but because of it. But what was the endgame? If the corporation was manipulating governments and exploiting customers, to what end? Was it simply greed? Or was there a larger, more sinister plan at play? These questions loomed larger with each passing day, as the world edged closer to its breaking point. As the end of the world drew nearer, not in dramatic explosions, but in slow, suffocating waves of climate collapse, economic instability, and resource scarcity. The end of the World Corporation's dominance reshaped society. The world became a reflection of its marketing tiers, neatly divided into those who could pay and those who could not. At the top of the hierarchy were the elites who purchased the Elysium Plan. Their bunkers were hailed as marvels of modern engineering, isolated from the chaos and impervious to the disasters tearing through the world. These customers lived in surreal comfort, their survival transformed into a kind of dystopian luxury excursions. While the world outside burned, they shared stories of exquisite meals and virtual reality excursions that let them experience the outside world without leaving their gilded prisons. Meanwhile, the middle-tier customers of Sustain Plus faced a different reality. Their shelters worked as promised. Barely. Supplies were rationed and breakdowns were common. Tensions ran high in these crowded, utilitarian spaces, where the occupants clung to the faint hope that they had made the right investment. The corporation's customer service drones, cheerful but useless, offered little comfort. These shelters became pressure cookers of frustration, guilt, and paranoia. And the real chaos unfolded in the shadows of the basic extinction avoidance kit. The societal divide that the corporation had amplified turned into open conflict. Desperation bred resentment, and resentment turned into violence. Makeshift militias began targeting bunkers, not just for the resources inside, but as a statement against the inequality that had led to this moment. Survivalists who had once been customers became prisoners of their own decisions, locked away in shelters that felt more like tombs. The corporation's executives, watching from their rumored vault, seemed untouchable, but cracks were forming in their fortress of control. Whistleblowers leaked documents showing that the corporation had overbooked its shelters, selling more packages than they could accommodate. Some guaranteed bunkers were nothing more than glorified shipping containers, or bait and switch on a planetary scale. The world teetered on the edge of collapse, not just because of the disasters, but because of the deeper truth they revealed, that humanity's greatest threat wasn't the apocalypse itself, but the greed and inequality that thrived in its shadow. And then came the tipping point. A viral video surfaced, a former employee of the corporation trembling and tearful, detailing the full scope of the company's betrayal. "They sold us survival," the employee said, "but what they delivered was extinction." The video spread like wildfire, igniting riots, rebellions, and a global outcry. But would it be enough? Could the same society that had bought into the corporation's lies now dismantle its grip? Or was it already too late to turn back the clock? The viral exposé marked the beginning of the end for the end of the world corporation. But the fallout was far from simple. Protests erupted worldwide, fueled by a fury that had been simmering for decades. Those who had been left to die with faulty survival kits turned their anger into action, uniting with those who had been exploited by the system long before the apocalypse loomed. Governments, once complacent and complicit, scrambled to regain control. Leaders who had once been swayed by the corporation's lobbying and promises of partnership now found themselves cornered by an enraged populace. Emergency measures were declared, and investigations were launched into the corporation's operations. But dismantling an empire built on fear and profit wasn't as easy as flipping a switch. The corporation's upper echelons, ensconced in the vault, were unmoved by the chaos outside. They had planned for this. The leaked documents revealed that the vault wasn't just a shelter, it was a command center, equipped with the technology and resources to re-emerge as rulers of a post-apocalyptic world. Their strategy was chillingly simple. Wait for the unrest to burn itself out, then rebuild civilization in their image. But the world outside wasn't following their script. The protests weren't just about the corporation. They became a reckoning for the entire system that had allowed it to thrive. People began to organize, sharing resources, rebuilding communities, and forming networks of mutual aid. What started as survival became something more, a collective refusal to return to the status quo. The turning point came when a group of rogue hackers breached the corporation's servers, releasing terabytes of confidential data. The files included blueprints for the vault, financial records, and damning evidence of its role in sabotaging global disaster preparedness. The public learned in excruciating detail how the corporation had orchestrated their suffering for profit. The backlash was swift and unforgiving. Coordinated strikes targeted the corporation's remaining facilities, dismantling its infrastructure piece by piece. Even those who had once benefited from the system turned against it, realizing that their survival had come at too high a cost. Inside the vault, the executives faced an uncomfortable reality. Their isolation, once a symbol of power, had become their prison. Cut off from the outside world, they were forced to confront the consequences of their hubris. The same fear they had weaponized against the masses now consumed them. But the world outside wasn't finished breaking apart. As the remnants of the corporation crumbled, a new question emerged. What came next? Without the artificial hierarchy of survival packages, how would humanity navigate the aftermath? Could a society built on exploitation reinvent itself, or would it fall into the same traps? The answers weren't clear, but one thing was certain. The old world was gone. The end of the corporation wasn't just a victory. It was a reckoning, a chance to rebuild from the ashes of its greed. But even in this moment of hope, shadows lingered. After all, survival wasn't just about outlasting the apocalypse. It was about finding a way to live with each other afterward. In the wake of the end of the World Corporation's downfall, humanity stood at a crossroads. The collapse of the once omnipotent company didn't just dismantle a system. It left a vacuum, one that could either be filled with a new vision for the future or spiral back into chaos. The remnants of the corporation became monuments to greed, scattered across the landscape like ruins of a lost civilization. Abandoned bunkers, empty supply warehouses, and defunct corporate offices served as grim reminders of what had been. Yet, within these husks, a new kind of energy began to stir, one born not of desperation, but of possibility. Communities that had been fractured by inequality and fear started to rebuild. What began as scattered acts of rebellion transformed into a global movement for change. People reimagined what survival could mean, not as a commodity to be bought and sold, but as a collective responsibility. The lines that had once divided humanity, wealth, geography, and status, blurred in the face of a shared realization. They had been manipulated into fighting each other, while the real enemy thrived. Innovative solutions sprang up from unlikely places. Former customers of the Sustained Plus tier, who had experienced both privilege and struggle, led efforts to repurpose the corporation's technology. The once exclusive bunkers became community shelters, their walls reinforced by the labor of those who had been left outside them. Hydroponic systems, originally designed for luxury, now fed entire neighborhoods. Even the derided coffin club kits were salvaged and improved, a testament to humanity's resilience and ingenuity. But the transition wasn't without its challenges. Trust, once shattered, was slow to rebuild. Old habits of competition and self-preservation lingered, threatening to derail progress. And while the corporation's leadership had been exposed, its wealth and resources hadn't vanished. Whispers persisted that some executives had escaped the vault, retreating to hidden enclaves where they plotted their return. This tension came to a head when a new entity emerged, the Collective for Global Resilience. Formed from a coalition of activists, scientists, and former corporation whistleblowers, the collective sought to rewrite the rules of survival. Their goal wasn't just to prevent another apocalypse, but to address the systemic issues that had made the corporation possible in the first place. They introduced radical ideas: universal access to shelter, open-source survival technology, and a global council to oversee disaster preparedness. These proposals were met with both hope and skepticism. Could humanity truly leave behind the systems of power and greed that had defined its history? Or was this just another idealistic dream, destined to crumble under the weight of reality? As the dust settled, one question hung over the world like a cloud. Had humanity truly learned from its mistakes? The ruins of the end of the world corporation stood as both a warning and an opportunity. What came next wasn't guaranteed. It was a choice, one that would define the future, not just for those who survived, but for generations yet to come. And if you found this story compelling, subscribe to the channel and hit the notification bell to explore more thought-provoking content. Your journey into the extraordinary is just beginning.